Good evening, and welcome to a very special episode of The Angry Astronaut. I am coming to you not from Mojave, as I was originally stating, but somewhere in the desert close to Area 51. Ever since the government has come out with a report saying that people should speak out anytime they see anything unusual, something that they can't explain, especially people who are accustomed to watching the skies. They shouldn't be afraid of ridicule, and that the things that have been appearing in front of some of the most experienced pilots in the military may indeed represent a threat to this nation. And this report, since it's come out, I've decided that it's finally safe for me to come out and say what I actually know about UF. Oh, shit. Hello again, and welcome to a very unusual episode of The Angry Astronaut, a topic that I've done my very best to avoid over the year and a half since I started this channel. I have always been very, very hesitant to talk about UFOs or whatever the government wants to call them right now. I'm still going to call them unidentified flying objects. I think that that's very descriptive of what they are, or what they appear to be anyway, simply because we just didn't have enough evidence that had been released from reliable sources anyway. I would talk about subjects involving extraterrestrial civilizations and stick to topics where we have a lot of observational data. And so that would be restricted to astronomical phenomena, both interstellar and then, in the case of Oumuamua, something that passed through our solar system and something that was closely observed by some of the best optics and the best astronomical equipment that our planet had available to it. And yet, still, natural explanations elude us, and an artificial explanation, in my opinion, remains the best one. These were the sorts of things that I stuck to for the most part until now. Now the government has finally released something official, although it isn't a lot, to be honest. It is a very short document, essentially. Even though the it starts off with what it calls an executive summary, in my opinion, the whole thing is an executive summary. It doesn't point out any individual incidents, except for one that was debunked as a rapidly deflating balloon, as it was called. It was positively identified as such, but there are many other incidents where there is no explanation, at least as far as they know right now. And some of these incidents involve the use of both anecdotal information from military personnel having spotted these objects, and on top of that, other types of detection, including radar, those sorts of things. And those are the incidents that, of course, are the most interesting. But unfortunately, the report doesn't include any of that. It doesn't include a whole lot of details. Now, it doesn't even say who these details are going to be handed over to for further analysis. It simply suggests that it should be handed over. And I have to admit, the whole thing kind of pisses me off. For as many months as we've been waiting for this to come out, finally it does. And it really is a bit of an anticlimax. And yet, the report does have a few things to say that, frankly, the government, and indeed even the scientific community, has never dared to say in the past. And I think that alone is significant. And that's the reason why I decided to finally come out with an episode about it. Because even though there isn't any specific details, scientific data included in the report, there is a suggestion that that evidence exists, that that evidence should be analyzed, and it's a complete and radical change of philosophy when it comes to examining these incidents and these objects, whatever they may be. Even though the report doesn't come out and specifically say aliens, it also doesn't dismiss aliens, as so many other articles are swift to do when we're talking about astronomical incidents that defy natural explanation. This is a very interesting change of philosophy and one that I would like to examine right now. Okay, so we've all seen the images, night vision, very grainy looking stuff that honestly, there's a lot of UFO footage taken out there that looks a lot better than this. But the difference is, of course, this is night vision military equipment taking these shots, and the Pentagon says that they're real. That is to say that there's something that cannot currently be explained. And of course, all of us have been wondering very urgently and anticipating, what is this report going to say? What are the conclusions that the military is going to draw? What the hell is going to happen? And unfortunately, this report really does none of this. However, that isn't to say that this report gives us no information whatsoever. On the contrary, it actually gives us quite a lot. It's entitled Preliminary Assessment, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, or UAP, which is what the military wants to call these things now. And it's from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and it just came out 3 days ago from the time that I'm recording this, so very recent news. And it comes to a number of conclusions about these things that we've been seeing, or that a lot of people have been seeing for many decades, and claiming with great enthusiasm that they are real. Damn it, they're real. And to just about everybody's shock and amazement, the government did acknowledge in this report that, quote, most of the UAP reported probably do represent physical objects, given that a majority of UAP were registered across multiple sensors to include radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapon seekers, and visual observation. So we're not just talking about anecdotal sightings anymore. We're talking about sightings that were backed up by other information provided by other types of extremely sensitive and accurate equipment. Now, does the report say anything about extraterrestrials? No, but it does say that these objects seem to be exhibiting characteristics and flight qualities that are different than anything that we currently possess. As a matter of fact, it's entirely different than this depiction of a UFO that clearly has a form of propulsion. The report is actually very clear about this. Quote, a handful of UAP appear to demonstrate advanced technology. In 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems possessed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. So all of a sudden, UFOs have drifted from the domain of people like this guy, or people who this actor is trying to portray, into the field of mainstream science. The report encourages scientific analysis of this data, of these particular incidents. However, it doesn't say who should be doing the analysis or when. So, vindication at last. Us ufologists have not been crazy. There are alien intelligences keeping us under observation. They have always been here, observing some sort of non interference directive, keeping us closely under observation, studying us, and not seriously interfering with our planet's culture. Or are they? Or are there even any aliens at all? Well, the report doesn't say anything about that, but it does actually mention several times that these things could represent a threat to national security for a variety of different reasons. Quote, UAP pose a hazard to the safety of flight and could pose a broader danger if some instances represent sophisticated collection against U.S. military activities by a foreign government or demonstrate a breakthrough aerospace technology by a potential adversary. The UAPTF has 11 reports of documented instances in which pilots reported near misses with the UAP. So in other words, not only are these things disrupting our training exercises, and by us I mean the US military, they're also nearly colliding with our aircraft, at least in a minority of cases. Interestingly, the report goes on to say, quote, we currently lack data to indicate any UAP are part of a foreign collection program or indicative of a major technological advancement by a potential adversary. We continue to monitor for evidence of such programs, given the counterintelligence challenge they would pose, particularly as some UAP have been detected near military facilities or by aircraft carrying the U.S. government's most advanced sensor systems. In other words, we have no evidence that other countries have such technology, so who does? Unsurprisingly, the report also strongly recommends that further data be collected, and yet this is a problem, and for the first time, the government acknowledges the sociocultural stigmas that are attached to anybody who does report such things. Quote, narratives from aviators in the operational community and analysts from the military and IC describe disparagement associated with observing UAP, reporting it, or attempting to discuss it with colleagues, although the effects of these stigmas have lessened as senior members of the scientific policy, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public. Reputational risk may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic, unquote. And this is precisely the point that Dr. Avi Loeb was trying to make in his book Interstellar, amongst others, that there is a great deal of stigma attached to any serious astrophysicist or astronomer who claims an artificial origin for any astronomical phenomenon. He also points out that you can get grant money a lot easier if you're pondering the existence of things like multiple universes, phenomena that we have no observational data on, as opposed to things like Oumuamua that we have tons of observational data on from some of the most advanced equipment on the planet. Perhaps this report, in some roundabout way, will change the scientific community's approach towards these things, and there may be more astrophysicists willing to explore these sorts of possibilities. I have, of course, made several videos not only about Oumuamua, but other astronomical phenomena that have so far defied natural explanation, but Oumuamua remains one of the most compelling. An object that traveled outside of its projected trajectory, in other words, accelerating without any natural form of propulsion. The only form of propulsion we being familiar with is cometary outgassing, and the most advanced equipment on the planet, specifically designed to detect such things, detected nothing. Oumuamua continued to move and tumble at precisely the same rate without any natural forms of propulsion to accomplish this. And that's just one of a number of very unusual things about this object that defy natural explanation. And as most of us know, in a famous paper linked in the description, Dr. Loeb also studied whether or not solar radiation alone could push an object the size of Oumuamua to the degree of deviation that it demonstrated while it was flying through the solar system. And this study determined that the object would have to be at most a couple of millimeters thick. In other words, something very similar to what the Planetary Society put up a few years ago, that of course being a light sail. The difference is, of course, we're not looking at an object that's defying the laws of physics. We're actually looking at an object that's performing very similarly to the way that something we have already created has done. It is my hope that because of reports like this, people like Dr. Loeb are no longer going to be in a minority, but rather there's going to be a new crop of scientists who are willing to explore such phenomena with an open mind. Once again, phenomena like Oumuamua, an object that continued to tumble at precisely the same rate, even though natural outgassing would have changed that rate. And there's no way to explain this aside from something artificial keeping its rate of tumbling constant. And on top of that, there was no physical evidence of cometary outgassing at all, and we kept this thing under observation. Oh, you've heard all of this before. Let's move on. Another detail from the report that I found to be very significant was the sheer volume of the number of incidents. 144 reports originating from U.S. government sources, and this is just from 2014 until 2021. And of these, 80 reports involved observation with multiple sensors, 80 incidents that aren't just relying on anecdotal or photographic evidence. That's actually pretty significant. However, the report is quick to point out that any of these incidents can be attributed to a number of different causes, such as airborne clutter like birds or balloons, or recreational unmanned aerial vehicles, or natural atmospheric phenomena, or United States government developmental programs. However, they say, quote, "We were unable to confirm that these systems accounted for any of the UAP reports we collected," unquote. Also, foreign adversary systems, this is the one that they're the most concerned about. And then finally, the very cryptic other category. But when it comes to this other category, as excited as we might like to be about extraterrestrial technology, especially technology that defies the existing laws of physics, I urge a lot of caution and a lot of skepticism. The stuff that I've covered so far involves technology and physics that we understand, phenomena that can be connected to artificial causes that we could conceivably create ourselves one day, not something that completely defies the laws of physics. That is entirely different. For example, I've heard certain fringe physicists say things about the infamous Tic Tac videos and things associated with it as if the aliens are utilizing some sort of Alcubierre warp drive to fold space, allowing them to perform these seemingly impossible aerodynamic feats. Now, the very notion that something this powerful, utilizing this much energy, and something that could actually fold space could be something that could be utilized in our atmosphere without us taking notice of it seems utterly impossible, to the point of being ludicrous, really. And so I think that it might be also good to take all of this exciting information with a healthy dose of skepticism until the data is very thoroughly researched by scientists, perhaps at NASA, the ESA, and other reputable organizations, or perhaps even Dr. Loeb. Also, if these extraterrestrial visitors are indeed capable of such amazing aerodynamic feats, capable of folding space without us noticing the rather impressive side effects that would come with such a phenomena, then why would they buzz our aircraft so closely, coming so close so our pilots have to make emergency maneuvers to avoid them? Why would they do such things except perhaps to intimidate us? And if that was the case, they could do something like this. And they could do the same thing if they simply wanted to announce their presence to the world, as some have suggested. And it's important to also note that even when the visual evidence is supported by other types of detection equipment, such as radar, those sorts of things can be fooled or flat out wrong. This is Stanislav Petrov, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet military during the time of the Cold War. And in 1983, he was the officer on duty in the Soviet equivalent of Strategic Air Command. And while he was on duty, a terrifying incident occurred. Their satellites, infrared detection satellites, which had never been wrong before, detected not one, not two, not three, but five ICBM launches from the United States on their way to the Soviet Union. In 1983, tensions were extremely high between the US and the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan had called the Soviets an evil empire. The Soviets had just shot down a Korean airliner, causing a massive international incident. And Reagan had openly spoken about limited nuclear war. So this young man had to make a decision in the space of a few minutes as to whether or not to recommend a nuclear launch. And unlike in the United States, the president doesn't have some sort of black box in the Soviet Union, or rather didn't, with launch codes to fire. Instead, once this man made this recommendation, the bosses in charge of the Soviet military would almost undoubtedly have given the order to launch. The protocols were clear. These satellites had never been wrong before, and they had detected 5 separate launches. He had to give the order to retaliate. And if he had, nuclear Armageddon would have rained down on the human race in 1983 before a lot of you were even born. And instead, this man decided to let cooler heads prevail. He did not trust the system, and he did not give the order to launch. It had actually cost him his military career, but he did save the world, and few people realize that. And sadly, he died just a few years ago. And guess what? The system was tested from top to bottom, and no faults were found. As a matter of fact, the system never had another failure again. It's amazing. No one understands what happened that night, but because of this one man's action, all of us are still alive today. My point? Even these kinds of systems, highly sophisticated military equipment, can fail. And so, before we start rushing to any conclusions about strange vehicles that defy the laws of physics and seem to be utilizing technologies that can warp space and do all sorts of other things that would make a lot of science fiction authors cringe, this data needs to be thoroughly analyzed by reputable organizations outside the military. The good news? That's exactly what the military wants. So, yeah, at the end of the day, as I said in the beginning, no real specifics, no data for us to examine, no exact information of any kind, what radar, array, or what radar on what ship picked out what object at what time. All of these sorts of things are not individually identified or categorized or anything in this report. The whole thing, as I said before, is just kind of an executive summary, and really not what everybody was hoping for. We were hoping for a little bit more in the way of details, but as I've mentioned in the video, the suggestion is that those details are there. They're there for scientists to examine. And so now the question is, who gets to examine the data? Does the military get to examine it some more? Because presumably they've examined it quite a bit as it is. Does NASA get to examine it? Does the international community get to examine it? Regardless of what happens, the military and indeed the government seems to be taking all of this very seriously, which is a complete turnaround from the philosophy of the government and the scientific community and anybody that anyone took seriously in the past, including really myself. I mean, I've always been very skeptical of these things and remain skeptical of things that we haven't been able to analyze in a laboratory. But if we have some specific data that can be analyzed in a laboratory, then things might change. Then we might actually have some real evidence. And if these objects or ships or craft or whatever they are indeed performing maneuvers that seem to defy the laws of aerodynamics, the laws of physics, the sorts of extremes that we keep hearing about, if this is indeed the case, then this is a very, very serious situation. This is a strong indication of technology that's far beyond ours, far beyond anything that anyone on this planet could possibly create. But again, as I also mentioned in the video, this data can be misleading. So we must be very careful about any data that we get from these sorts of things that seem to indicate types of technology that can defy the laws of physics. Because if we start running into things like that, then we also start running into the idea that our very theories of physics and our theories of the natural world may be based on sand. And that is a very, very serious thing that affects the entirety of the scientific community and the entirety of the discipline of physics and astrophysics and everything else you can think of associated with natural laws. Anything that defies them is going to upend our entire scientific system. Anything that does that had better have a hell of a lot of proof behind it. That's all I have to say. So, we have a launch coming up very soon, hopefully, Virgin Orbit, and I'm going to be gathering as much information as I can. If you like the fact that I ventured into this strange world of unidentified flying objects, as I will continue to identify them or continue to refer to them as rather stubbornly. If you like all of this, it's all in the description. There are many ways to support me, and I could definitely use your help right now with this travel to California. Obviously, not an inexpensive thing, but at the same time, a like and a subscribe, and I will be a very happy person. So, until this evidence is actually handed over to NASA or to some public institution that can release public findings to the world and tell us exactly what this report is all about, until we really do know the truth, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.